Hello, my friend. Welcome to Dreamy Nights. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, we'll wander together through a place of stillness and shimmer, a quiet world of soft sand, ancient echoes, and one gentle voice that carries stories across the desert wind. So settle in, take a slow breath, and let the hush of evening surround you. The stars are waking. The air is calm. When you're ready, our story begins.
Yeka.
The last light of day stretched across the desert, turning the dunes into waves of molten gold. Each curve of sand caught the fading sun like silk, and for a moment, the vast expanse seemed to breathe a living sea of warmth and memory. In that gentle hush before nightfall, a figure appeared on the horizon. His pace was unhurried, measured by the rhythm of the desert itself. The merchant's name was Sarin, a man of quiet steps and softer eyes, who carried his world within a bundle of woven cloths and wooden chests. Every item he bore shimmered faintly, touched by the glow of countless sunsets before this one. As he walked, the wind whispered low, combing through the dunes and stirring faint trails behind him. In the air lingered the scent of distant myrrh and dust, a blend of warmth and rest, like incense fading in a temple long forgotten.
He.
Ahead, the land began to dip, revealing what might have seemed a mirage to untrained eyes. A patch of green and gold cradled by the dunes, where water gathered in a pool as still as glass. Palm fronds swayed gently in the breeze, and faint music, soft and uncertain, drifted from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sarin smiled, as if recognizing an old friend. "Ah," he murmured under his breath, "the oasis waits once more." His voice was no louder than the rustle of silk, yet it carried with the weight of memory. He approached the edge of the water, his sandals brushing through fine sand that shimmered with cool silver light. The sun, a pale coin, now slipping beneath the horizon, gilded the tips of the palms before surrendering to dusk. He set down his satchels with slow, deliberate grace, each motion like a small ceremony. One by one, he unfurled lengths of fabric, dyed in gentle tones: ochre, ivory, deep indigo. Beneath the shade of a palm, he placed a small brass lamp and lit it, the flame flickering to life with a soft sigh. Its glow cast ripples across the water, catching tiny reflections of the stars just beginning to bloom overhead. The desert was no longer silent. Crickets sang in the reeds near the shore, and somewhere far off, a lone desert bird called once, then fell still. The air cooled, tasting faintly of dates and earth. Saran lowered himself beside the water, crossing his legs and resting his hands upon his knees. His gaze followed the lamp's reflection, dancing gently upon the pool. "Every desert holds a secret," he whispered, "and every traveler carries one too."
Guilty.
From one of his bundles, he withdrew a small pouch and poured fine grains of sand into his palm. They shimmered faintly. Not like ordinary sand, each grain glinted with the softest inner light, like ground pearl or memory itself. "These," he said softly, to no one in particular, "come from the path between dawn and dusk, a place only the winds remember." He let the sand fall, listening to its faint hiss as it returned to the earth. The rhythm was soothing, the motion practiced as though he had performed it 1,000 times before. He then opened a small wooden box, inside which rested curious trinkets, fragments of glass worn smooth by time, a length of thread dyed crimson, and a coin stamped with markings no one alive could read. Each carried its own quiet story, though Saran spoke none aloud. He only smiled, the expression calm and far away, as if each object sang softly in his thoughts.
Aki.
The first stars now shimmered across the darkening sky, their light mirrored perfectly in the oasis pool. Saran leaned back, listening to the wind's soft hum, to the cricket's gentle rhythm, to the steady silence of sand stretching endlessly beyond. He began to hum a low, lilting tune with no clear beginning or end. It was a melody of the desert shaped by distance and solitude, and the sound of it felt like rest itself. The flame of the brass lamp danced in time, flickering gold across his weathered face. As his song faded, the night deepened, warm and vast and full of patient stars. Saran reached for a small pot beside him, filled it with water from the pool, and poured it gently into a clay cup. The steam rose faintly, carrying the scent of herbs, sweet mint and sage. He took a slow sip, eyes half closed, letting the quiet settle fully into his bones. "This," he murmured, "is the beginning of all stories. Silence, water, and the listening sky." Arthur. Beyond him, the desert stretched forever, a sea of shadows and silver light calm beneath the rising moon. The palm leaves whispered softly overhead, their movement steady as breath, and in that moment, the oasis seemed to hold its own heartbeat, steady, patient, timeless. The wandering merchant rested in its center, his lamp glowing like a fallen star. The moon had risen fully by the time Saran stirred again. Its pale reflection drifted across the oasis pool, weaving light through the slow ripple of water. Around him, the night was hushed, but alive, a living stillness, filled with soft sound. The distant murmur of wind moved between the palms like a sigh. A sand fox padded somewhere nearby its paws, whispering against the ground before vanishing into shadow. Saran sat quietly for a long moment, listening to the world breathe. His fingers traced the edge of his brass lamp, now glowing faintly like a memory of sun. He smiled small and patient, as though the night itself had spoken. From one of his bundles, he drew out a roll of fabric wrapped in leather. He untied the string and unfurled the cloth, revealing inside an assortment of objects, each one a story waiting to be told. A small vial of colored sand, shimmering with pink and gold. A folded parchment, its ink faded by years of travel. A ring of carved bone, smooth to satin by the heat of his hands. He set each object down with care upon a woven mat, aligning them in a pattern known only to him. These, he said softly, his voice barely more than breath, are the remnants of the road, the treasures that find a traveler rather than the other way around.
Ich hörte.
He took the parchment first, unfolding it gently so it would not tear. The ink was soft and uneven, its script foreign to all but him. He smiled faintly. This, he murmured, was once a map. It no longer shows the way to any city, for the sands have changed the world it describes. But perhaps it still knows the wind. He held the parchment up toward the lantern light. The faint glow shone through the thin fibers, revealing small marks, drawings of dunes, a crescent moon, a single dot at the center where the map's lines converged. Saran traced the dot with one fingertip. Here, he whispered, is where a story begins. It is said that when the desert was young, it sang to the stars. The stars answered, and where the song met the earth, this oasis was born. The merchant's gaze lifted to the still water before him. Its surface reflected the stars as though the heavens themselves had stooped to rest within the pool. Perhaps that is why the water here never dries, he said, his voice soft as the wind. It remembers the song. The palms swayed gently overhead, and the light shifted. The small vial of sand caught his eye. Next, the colors within glimmering, faintly blending, like sunrise within glass. He unstoppered the vial and sprinkled a few grains onto the mat. They shimmered as they fell, leaving trails like faint gold dust. Once he said, I met a woman who lived where the dunes meet the sea. She told me that each color in the sand is a whisper from a different time. The gold from mornings long past, the pink from dusk, and the white from moonlight that forgot to fade. He smiled again, remembering. She gave me this sand as a gift, saying that when I was far from the shore, I could still listen to the ocean through the wind. He closed the vial carefully and placed it back in the cloth, his movements slow and reverent. The scent of his herbs drifted through the air, mint cardamom and the faint sweetness of desert blooms that opened only under starlight. A warm breeze moved through the palms, then rustling the fronds with a sound like the turning of ancient pages. Saran looked upward. The stars seemed closer now, countless points of silver burning quietly in the blue-black sky. The moon hung low, round and tender. He took a slow breath and leaned back upon his hands, feeling the cool sand beneath his palms. The desert, he said, is a keeper of patience. It teaches that even stillness is a journey. His voice lingered in the air for a while, soft as mist. Nearby, the water rippled faintly as a fish broke the surface and disappeared again. Circles spread outward, reflecting the light of the lamp in expanding rings. Saran watched until the last ripple stilled, then reached for his cup once more. The tea had cooled now, carrying the flavor of herbs and quiet. He drank slowly. Even the simplest sip, he said, can carry the taste of 1,000 places. Beyond the oasis, the dunes glowed faintly in moonlight, rolling hills of pale silver stretching endlessly into night. The silence there was deeper, yet it was not empty. It hummed with the memory of travelers and stars of footsteps long erased by wind. Saran began to hum again, that same melody of the desert, low, cyclical, soothing. The tune seemed to blend with the sound of the palms, the ripple of the pool, the soft sigh of the wind across sand. Somewhere within that sound, the night itself seemed to sway, as though listening. He let the song fade, naturally replaced by quiet, so vast it felt sacred. The merchant smiled once more, his gaze distant and peaceful. "The oasis has welcomed me again," he murmured, "and soon it will share its secrets." Basa, he leaned forward and gathered his objects, wrapping them carefully once more in their cloth. Each fold was a gesture of care, each knot a promise to remember. Then he placed the bundle beside him, its edges touched by the lamp's golden glow. The night deepened. A faint mist rose from the pool, softening the edges of reflection until the stars looked like gentle fireflies beneath the water. Saran closed his eyes, letting the breath of the desert move through him. For a while, nothing stirred, only stillness, calm and infinite. And then, somewhere beyond the dunes, the faintest sound of a bell echoed a wind chime swaying gently in the distance. Saran's eyes opened, and a knowing smile curved his lips. "The desert remembers," he whispered. The sound of that distant chime lingered softly in the air, like a voice carried on memory. Its tone was delicate, a whisper of metal against wind, the kind of sound that made one pause and listen without knowing why. Saran's eyes followed the dark horizon where the dunes rolled endlessly, their curves silvered by moonlight. He did not rise at once. Instead, he watched the slow rhythm of the oasis, the water breathing in tiny ripples, the palms tracing arcs of shadow upon the sand. The night was cool and fragrant with sage. Somewhere, the faint call of a nightjar drifted through the stillness. When at last, Saran stood, his movements were unhurried. He brushed the fine grains of sand from his robe, adjusted the folds, and reached for his walking stick. A slender piece of driftwood polished smooth by years of touch. "There are sounds," he said softly, "that belong only to the night. They are not meant to guide the traveler, only to remind him he is never alone." He began to walk along the edge of the pool. The sand here was damp and cool beneath his feet. The brass lamp he carried cast long golden trails that shimmered upon the water. With every few steps, the flame trembled, small, steady, alive.
Araya.
He reached a cluster of palms and paused beneath their canopy. The fronds brushed lightly against one another, their movement like the sound of distant rain. In the half-light beneath them, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and fresh water. A small shape stirred near the roots of the palms, a desert hare, soft gray and still. Its eyes reflected the lamp's glow for a moment, before it darted silently into the undergrowth. Saran smiled, his expression tender. "Every creature," he murmured, "has its own path through the sands. Mine just happens to wander longer than most." He leaned against the trunk of a palm, letting his gaze rest on the moon's reflection in the pool. "The moon has always been a good companion," he added. "She listens, but never interrupts." He lowered himself to sit again, resting his walking stick beside him. The sand shifted softly beneath his weight, and the breeze moved like a quiet hand through his hair. From the satchel at his side, he drew a small clay bowl and a pouch of fine powder. When he opened it, the air filled with a subtle sweetness, the scent of crushed dates and warm spice. He poured a small portion into the bowl, added a trickle of water, and stirred with slow, deliberate circles. The sound was faint, soothing, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. "This mixture," he said in a murmur, "is a merchant's memory. I make it wherever I rest, and its scent tells me I am safe." He set the bowl beside the lamp and let the aroma drift outward. The fragrance mingled with the air, soft, calming, familiar. It wrapped the oasis like a blanket. The merchant tilted his head back, eyes half closed. "When I was young," he began, his tone quieter now, "I believed the desert was endless because it wished to hide something, a secret too large for men to carry. But as the years passed, I learned its truth is simpler. The desert hides nothing. It reveals only to those who move slowly enough to see. He opened his hands. In the lamplight, palms, weathered lines deep as dunes. Everything I've ever found worth keeping came to me in stillness. A cup of cool water, a stranger's story, the way moonlight folds around silence. The words floated through the night like drifting incense. His voice blended with the murmur of the palms, and for a while the world seemed suspended between breaths. A small breeze stirred the flame, and Saran reached forward, shielding it with his hand. His fingers glowed gold at the edges, the skin thin and luminous. Even light, he whispered, depends on the gentleness of the air. Beyond the oasis, the dunes began to shift color. Though it was still night, a faint blue hue touched the farthest ridges, a whisper of dawn to come. The stars overhead shimmered softer now, as though preparing to rest. Saran noticed the change but did not hurry it. Instead, he began to hum once more the same melody, ancient and circular, but quieter this time, almost a sigh. The tones seemed to travel outward, settling over the water, the palms, the sand. As he hummed, he began arranging a few small stones beside him. Smooth pebbles he had collected from distant oases. Each one was marked with faint carvings, a crescent, a line, a circle. He placed them in a spiral one by one, until the shape resembled the ripples in the pool. He gazed at his small creation with quiet satisfaction. The desert teaches patience, he said softly. It also teaches art that no one will see once the wind returns. And yet, we make it anyway. The lamp's flame flickered low, reflecting in his eyes like two small suns. Somewhere far across the dunes, the faint sound of the chime came again, slower this time, more distant. Saran lifted his head, listening. A knowing smile curved his lips. It's time, he whispered. He stood, brushed the sand from his robe once more, and bowed slightly to the oasis, a simple gesture of gratitude. The palms rustled faintly in reply, as though acknowledging his farewell for the night. But he did not yet leave. He turned back toward the pool, gazing at the water surface now perfectly still. Every oasis, he murmured, is a mirror. When you look into it, you see not what you found, but what you were seeking all along. He extinguished the lamp with a soft breath. The flame vanished, leaving only moonlight and reflection. The night embraced him like an old friend. The moon still lingered over the horizon, a pale lantern suspended above the dunes. Yet already, the faintest trace of dawn had begun to color the world, soft and gradual, like the slow unfurling of silk. The stars dimmed one by one, retreating into the hush of morning. Saran remained beside the water, his silhouette quiet and still. The extinguished lamp rested near him, and the soft spiral of stones he had made now shimmered faintly in the silvery light. He watched as the edges of the dunes shifted from indigo to amber, their smooth faces etched with patterns of wind. He drew a slow breath and felt the change in the air, that delicate moment when night surrenders, yet day has not yet claimed the sky. This, he whispered, is the hour when the desert dreams. The oasis reflected the faint color of dawn, every ripple tinted with rose and gold. The palms trembled gently in the soft breeze, their fronds whispering secrets to the light. From somewhere unseen, a heron lifted into the air, its wings brushing the silence before vanishing beyond the dunes. Sarin smiled faintly. The world was waking, yet there was no urgency here. Only the slow grace of time itself stretching toward warmth. He reached for a clay jug resting nearby and poured water into a shallow basin. The sound was delicate and soothing, like rain falling into cupped hands. The merchant rinsed his fingers in the cool water, tracing small circles that disturbed the reflection of the pale sky. Every morning he said softly, "The desert writes itself anew. No footprint remains. No word lingers. Only the dunes remember, and even they forget in time." He dipped a folded cloth into the basin, wrung it gently, and passed it over his face. The chill refreshed him. It smelled faintly of earth and the first blossoms that opened by starlight. When he looked up, the world seemed softer, as though touched by forgiveness. He lit the brass lamp again, though there was no need for light now. The gesture was ritual, a way to greet the day with gratitude. The flame flickered low, reflecting in the curve of the water beside him, and Sarin whispered a few quiet words, old and rhythmic like prayer. He turned toward his bundle and unfolded a small piece of parchment, the one he had studied by moonlight. This time, the faint markings upon it seemed clearer, though nothing had changed. The soft dawn glow revealed new shades of ink, new patterns hidden in the paper's grain. Sarin smiled knowingly. The same story, he murmured, always tells itself differently when read in the morning. He rested the parchment on his knee and ran a finger along its edge. It once told of a caravan that carried glass across the sands. They said the glass captured sunlight and held it even after nightfall. It was called the light that sleeps. He paused, his gaze far away. But perhaps it was never glass at all. Perhaps it was simply understanding that what we hold, even briefly, can illuminate us long after. He folded the parchment again, tucking it carefully away. Around him, the air began to warm, carrying a scent of dry grass and mint. The crickets had grown quiet now, replaced by the distant trill of morning birds. Saran reached into his satchel and drew out a small cup. From a pouch, he poured crushed leaves, then filled the cup with water from the jug. The steam rose faintly, swirling in lazy spirals before disappearing into the air. The fragrance was mild green, fresh, alive. He lifted the cup to his lips and took a small sip. The taste was gentle, the flavor of beginnings. Tea, he mused, teaches stillness more than anything I have known. You cannot rush its warmth, nor its quiet. It teaches the patience of heat, the silence between breaths. He smiled as he cradled the cup in his hands, feeling the warmth seep into his palms. The road offers many lessons, he added, but the simplest ones are always found beside water. The sky brightened further now. The pale silver of dawn deepened into soft gold, and the first touch of sunlight crept over the dunes, brushing the palms with light. The water shimmered in response, its surface alive with reflected motion. Saran stood and turned toward the east, where the sun had not yet appeared, but had already painted the air with its promise. The world felt both vast and intimate, every grain of sand, distinct, yet part of something endless. He breathed in deeply, letting the cool air fill him. To greet the sun, he whispered, is to greet memory itself. When the first edge of sunlight finally rose above the dunes, it caught upon the brass of his lamp, flaring bright for an instant before softening again. The light spilled over the oasis, washing everything in a tender radiance. Palms, sand, water, and the quiet merchant standing in its midst. Saran lowered his head slightly, his expression calm and reverent. May each dawn be gentle, he murmured, and each night forgiving. He took the final sip of his tea, placed the cup beside the basin, and let the steam fade into morning air. Around him, the desert stretched in its golden silence, renewed, infinite, and at peace. The wandering merchant exhaled slowly, his heart as still as the water's surface. And in that quiet as light filled the sky, the chimes sounded once again, faint, distant, and warm, as though echoing his thoughts. Saran smiled. Yes, he said softly, almost to himself. The day remembers. The morning had deepened into a pale, honey-colored calm. Sunlight poured softly over the dunes, drawing long, slow shadows that curved and disappeared beneath the palms. The air shimmered faintly, not yet hot, only touched by warmth, carrying the scent of ripened fruit and damp earth near the water's edge. Saran lingered beside the oasis a while longer. He was not eager to leave. Few travelers ever were. The place felt like a pause in time, a pocket of stillness, folded gently, into the vast, unending sands. He knelt to gather his belongings, his fingers moving with unhurried care. The soft clink of wooden boxes, the rustle of folded cloth, each sound echoed lightly in the quiet morning. His lamp, now cool to the touch, was wrapped carefully and placed among his wares. A small smile touched his lips. Every journey, he murmured, is an exchange what we carry for what the world offers in return. He glanced once more toward the pool. The water reflected the sky's pale blue, smooth as silk, framed by shadows of palm leaves. Tiny ripples danced where a breeze skimmed its surface. It was, he thought, a mirror made of time. Oh, a low sound drifted through the stillness, then faint but clear, like the creak of a wooden wheel, somewhere far beyond the dunes. Saren turned slightly, listening. The desert, vast as it was, carried sound for miles. Somewhere unseen, perhaps another traveler stirred, or a caravan stirred to life after rest. The merchant tilted his head and smiled. "Ah," he whispered, "perhaps others are waking too." He rose to his feet, his robe catching the light like soft, woven gold. He adjusted the strap of his satchel and took one last drink from his clay cup, the final taste of cool water, faintly sweet from the air. Then he bent to fill the cup once more, not for himself, but for the sand at his feet. "May you always be kind," he said softly, pouring a small offering onto the ground. The water disappeared instantly, drawn into the thirsty earth. Saren watched until the last drop was gone, then bowed his head in quiet gratitude. As he began to walk along the oasis edge, he paused near one of the palm trunks and placed his hand upon its bark. The surface was warm and rough, the texture familiar like the worn grain of his staff. "You have stood through many winds," he said gently. "May they always speak softly to you." A gust passed through the fronds above him, not strong only enough to stir the leaves into a whisper. He smiled at the sound, as though the tree had replied. From his pouch, he took a single seed, small, round, and golden brown. He crouched near the edge of the water and pressed it lightly into the sand. "A merchant carries many things," he murmured, "but sometimes the smallest gift is the one the desert remembers." He covered the seed carefully with a thin layer of sand, his fingers tracing a simple spiral over it, before he stood once more. The morning light grew stronger, flooding the oasis with radiance. The reflections of the palms swayed upon the pool, their outlines soft and wavering. A dragonfly hovered briefly above the surface wings, glinting blue and gold, before darting away. Saran continued to walk slowly around the water's curve, his staff leaving delicate impressions in the sand. Each step was deliberate, measured a quiet ritual of farewell. When he reached the far side, he paused to look back. From here, the oasis seemed even more like a dream. The palms clustered around their heart of water, the dunes curving protectively beyond. A perfect circle of life, cradled by stillness. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the scent of warm earth and sunlit air. Every resting place, he said softly, is also a beginning. He adjusted the folds of his robe and turned his gaze toward the open dunes beyond. The wind had already begun to erase his footprints from the night before. Each mark faded into smoothness, leaving no trace of his path. The desert, in its quiet way, was already returning to its seamless rhythm. He began his ascent up the nearest dune. The sand shifted beneath his sandals, whispering softly with every step. He did not hurry. There was no need. The sun climbed gently behind him, gilding his shadow across the slope. At the crest, he paused once more and looked back. The oasis glimmered below, a small jewel of green and gold nestled in an ocean of light. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his expression thoughtful and serene. Then, almost imperceptibly, he bowed a single fluid gesture of thanks. From his pouch, he withdrew the small vial of colored sand he had shown the night before. He uncorked it, letting the morning breeze touch its contents. A few grains escaped, catching the sunlight as they drifted away, pink, gold, white, dissolving into brightness. Saran watched them scatter, his eyes soft. Let them carry the memory of still water, he murmured, and the whisper of palms. He resealed the vial and slipped it back into his satchel. The wind brushed gently against his robe, carrying the faint scent of myrrh and mint, the fragrance of his evening by the oasis. He began to walk down the far side of the dune, his figure slowly merging with the golden expanse. And though the oasis grew smaller behind him, its presence seemed to follow a shimmer at the edge of thought, a stillness that would travel wherever he went.
Yeah.
Far above, the sun continued to climb, its light soft and benevolent. The dunes glowed like silk and gold. Saran's footsteps were soon lost in that vast quiet, but the sound of his slow, rhythmic walking seemed to echo faintly through the air, not as noise, but as memory. The desert listened and was content. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the dunes with its gentle gold. The desert was awake, but not yet fierce. Shadows still pooled softly in the hollows between ridges, and a tender haze shimmered above the horizon, where sky and sand seemed to merge into one endless breath. Saran walked slowly, his stride steady, unbroken. His staff left small crescent marks in the sand that trailed behind him, like verses written and forgotten in the same instant. The air shimmered faintly around him, alive with light. Not heat, not yet just the quiet brilliance of morning. He lifted his eyes to the expanse ahead. There was no path, only the memory of one. Yet he seemed to know where to go. The desert never repeats itself, he murmured, half smiling. And still, it always leads me home. The sound of his voice was swallowed by the vastness. Only the wind replied a sonrhythmic murmur that moved across the dunes like distant song.
No.
After some time, the ground began to shift. The sand gave way to patches of stone, smooth and worn by countless years. The color darkened to warm ochre, streaked faintly with quartz that caught the sunlight in subtle glints. Sarin stopped to rest, setting his satchel down and lowering himself to sit upon a flat rock. He drew his cloak loosely around him, not from cold, but from a wish to feel its comforting weight. The fabric smelled faintly of herbs and desert nights familiar as memory. From within his satchel, he withdrew a small wooden box bound with a thin leather strap. He undid it carefully, revealing inside a collection of delicate objects, a brass compass dulled with age, a folded scrap of parchment, and a small shell. The shell was pale with faint ridges that shimmered like water under sunlight. He turned it gently in his hand. "I found this far from any sea," he said softly, "buried in sand where no wave could ever reach. Perhaps it was carried here by wind, or perhaps the desert remembers what it once was." He held the shell to his ear and smiled. "Yes," he whispered, "it still sings."
Now, Tutus.
The breeze moved through the silence again, brushing across his face, carrying faint notes of warmth and spice. Somewhere far off, the desert murmured not a sound exactly, but a sense of movement, like the shifting of distant dunes. Sarin replaced the shell in its box and took out the compass. The needle quivered faintly, trembling as though uncertain. "You still remember north," he said with amusement. "But I have learned that direction is not the same as purpose." He turned the compass over in his palm, tracing its circular shape. "Every circle returns to itself," he mused. "That is the merchant's secret. The journey is not to find, but to carry and to share what was found when the time is right." He smiled faintly and placed the compass back in the box, closing the lid with quiet care. Then he leaned back upon the stone, letting the sun warm his face. His eyes half closed, he breathed in the scent of hot sand and faraway bloom.
Asa.
For a long time, he simply listened. The desert silence was not empty. It was full of distant wings soft gusts, and the faint rhythmic pulse of the earth beneath. Each sound folded into the next until they became one single, endless note of peace. Saran felt his body grow lighter, his thoughts slower. His mind drifted not toward dreams, but toward stillness, that deep quiet that lies beyond thought itself. He let his fingers trail through the sand beside him, feeling the texture of its grains, the coolness beneath the surface. The sands remember what they touch, he said softly. Each grain has held light wind and shadow, 1,000 suns, 1,000 moons, and still they remain calm. He closed his eyes. The silence deepened, growing round and soft like the hollow of a seashell. The air shimmered. When he opened his eyes again, the light had shifted softer now, more amber. Time had passed unnoticed. He smiled at the thought. The day was moving gently forward and he with it. He rose slowly, brushing sand from his robe, and slung his satchel once more across his shoulder. The desert waited unchanged and infinite. He began to walk again, this time guided not by map or compass, but by rhythm, the simple rhythm of breath and step of wind and stillness. Each movement was a quiet offering to the world. As he walked, he began to hum again the same melody that had followed him from the oasis. The tune wound softly through the air, rising and falling like a mirage of sound. The wind caught it and carried it onward, scattering it across the dunes like drifting petals of music. Before long, he came upon a new shape in the distance, the faint outline of ancient stones half buried in sand. Perhaps once a resting place, perhaps a marker of forgotten paths. He approached slowly, his steps leaving delicate prints in the pale earth. The stones were smooth and rounded, their surfaces etched faintly by time. Between them grew a few hardy plants, their leaves silver green and glistening with dew. Saran crouched to touch one gently. Even here, he said softly, life listens for the smallest whisper of water. He let his fingers linger, then drew them back. The scent of the plant, something like sage and honey, followed him as he stood. He looked out toward the horizon where light shimmered in endless waves. The oasis will fade behind me, he murmured, but its calm will not. It travels farther than any map could show. He raised his staff, resting it lightly against his shoulder, and took another step into the gold. Gya, high above the sky, burned clear and endless, and beneath it, the desert lay in perfect silence, vast, patient, and kind. Saran's figure moved steadily forward, small against the immensity of the land, his shadow flowing beside him like a companion made of light. Each step carried him deeper into stillness, farther into understanding. The merchant walked on, and the desert listened. The day unfurled slowly. the sun gliding toward its zenith like a golden tide. The light over the desert grew soft and shimmering, bending around the dunes in slow waves of heat. Each ridge quivered faintly in the air, turning distance into a mirage of motion. Saren's pace had not changed. He moved with the rhythm of the land, unhurried, steady, deliberate. His robe rippled faintly at his ankles, carrying a faint dusting of fine sand that caught the sun like powder. The wooden staff clicked gently against the ground. With each step, a quiet metronome marking time's passage. The horizon ahead shimmered with light. For a long while, nothing else stirred, no sound but wind, no shape but the eternal curves of sand. And yet the desert did not feel empty. It breathed, it watched, it waited. The stillness, Saren whispered, is its own kind of company. He smiled faintly, his eyes softened by the reflection of light. As the hours passed, the air grew warmer, filled with the faint hum of distant life. A cluster of pale flowers grew along the edge of a dune, tiny, almost invisible against the sand, their petals trembling in the heat. Saren paused beside them. He crouched slowly, touching the earth near their stems. The soil here was dry, yet beneath the surface, it was cool proof of unseen roots reaching deep into hidden water. "You are wiser than I," he murmured gently. "You bloom where others would rest." He leaned closer, inhaling the faint fragrance. It was soft and dry with a trace of honey, a scent that seemed both fragile and eternal. "The desert has its own garden," he said, "but one must slow down to see it." He cupped one of the flowers lightly between his fingers, careful not to harm it. "Everything that endures," he whispered, "learns to live in quiet." He let the bloom go and stood once more, brushing the sand from his knees. The wind shifted then, cool and sudden, carrying the faint whisper of movement, a reminder that the desert was alive even in its stillness. After a time, Saren found a small rise overlooking a valley of dunes. The shape of the land curved gently downward, like an immense bowl filled with sunlight. He sat upon the crest, resting his staff beside him, and looked out across the golden sea. The air shimmered faintly, and far below the illusion of water appeared a mirage, blue and trembling, almost real enough to drink. Saren watched it quietly, knowing the trick of the eye, yet still enchanted by its grace. "How kind," he murmured, "that even illusion can offer beauty." He reached for his satchel and retrieved a small cloth-wrapped parcel. Inside was a round, flat loaf of bread and a handful of dried fruit, dates, apricots, and figs. He broke the bread into small pieces and ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were an act of gratitude. Between mouthfuls, he gazed at the horizon. A traveler learns that hunger and peace often share the same silence, he mused. Both remind us to pause. He drank from his small flask the water cool, faintly sweet, then set it down beside him. His eyes half closed as the wind brushed his face, warm but soft. The afternoon deepened, and shadows began to lengthen again, stretching long fingers across the sand. The sky had softened from white to gold. The sun's descent had begun slow, reverent, inevitable. Saren remained seated, his breathing even, his mind untroubled. The desert moved around him, not in sound or shape, but in subtle changes of color and scent. The air cooled by degrees. The heat withdrew like a tide. He opened his eyes, gazing toward the horizon. Even the longest day must rest, he said softly. So too must the traveler. He rose, dusting the sand from his robe, and turned toward the west, where the sun hung like a burning coin above the dunes. Its reflection shimmered in the mirage below two suns, one real, one imagined, facing each other in perfect stillness. Saren smiled at the sight. The world, he whispered, has many mirrors. As he walked once more, the colors around him began to shift. The sand turned deeper from gold to amber, then to soft rose. The sky above deepened, too, streaked with faint lines of violet. A sense of calm spread across the land, vast and tender. He came upon a cluster of stones, half buried and ancient. Their surfaces bore faint carvings, symbols weathered into suggestion rather than shape. Saren ran his fingers along one of them. Perhaps another merchant left these, he murmured. A message or a promise. He traced a curved mark that might once have been a crescent. Or perhaps, he continued, they mean nothing at all. And that too is a kind of truth. The air around the stones held a faint coolness, as if the earth here remembered shade. Saren decided to rest. He sat again, drawing his robe around him as the last warmth of daylight caressed the horizon. The world fell into its evening hush, that sacred moment between brightness and night. The wind softened to a murmur. The dunes cooled beneath their surface, and the air filled with a faint, sweet scent of resin and dust. Saren reached into his satchel and drew out the small shell once more. He held it to his ear and listened, smiling, as a low hum filled the quiet. Even far from the sea, he said softly, its voice finds me. He lowered the shell and gazed toward the dimming sky. The first stars began to glint at the edges of twilight. The desert too, he whispered, has its tides. He placed the shell gently back in its box and let his eyes drift closed, feeling the slow rhythm of evening settle around him, not as an end, but as a soft return.
Hasoma.
Above him, the first evening wind brushed across the dunes, reshaping the surface of the world one breath at a time. The sound was low and constant, a lullaby written by earth and air. And there, beneath that deepening sky, the wandering merchant rested once more, his shadow blending with the sand, his spirit quiet, his story still unfolding in silence. Twilight unfolded slowly, painting the desert in soft hues of rose and indigo. The horizon shimmered between two worlds, one fading, one beginning. The last light of the sun brushed the tops of the dunes before vanishing, leaving behind a breath of gold that lingered just long enough to remember. Saran sat in stillness beside the carved stones, his eyes half open, watching the slow arrival of night. The air cooled around him, carrying the faint fragrance of distant blooms, unseen flowers that opened only under starlight. Each breeze moved tenderly, as though careful not to disturb the quiet. He drew his robe closer around him. The fabric, worn but soft, held the warmth of the day and the faint scent of herbs. Above, a single star brightened into being, followed by another and another, until the heavens were a mirror of the dunes, endless, shimmering, serene. The night returns, he murmured, as it always does, as it always should. He smiled, the expression small but luminous, and reached for the small brass lamp that had traveled with him through countless miles. Its surface reflected the starlight in pale gold. He lit it with a spark from flint and watched the flame rise steady and gentle, its glow trembling slightly in the open air.
Yahusha.
The circle of light spread softly across the sand. The stones around him glowed faintly, their edges catching the warmth. For a moment, it seemed as though the ancient carvings awoke not in movement, but in meaning, their lines whispering to one another in the flicker of flame. Saran poured a small measure of water from his flask into the palm of his hand and let it trickle down upon the earth. For the journey, he said softly, for the silence that carried me here. The water vanished, instantly absorbed into the sand. Yet in that gesture, something invisible seemed to breathe a quiet exchange between traveler and land, old as the wind itself. He leaned back and let his gaze wander toward the dark horizon. The desert, he whispered, keeps no secrets. It only listens until we hear ourselves again. From his satchel, he withdrew one final object, a tiny fragment of mirror no larger than a coin. He held it toward the lamplight, watching the reflection shimmer across his fingertips. It caught the flame, then, the stars blending both into a single glow. This, he said, was given to me by another wanderer. She told me that every reflection is a reminder not of what we see, but of what we are made of. Light dust and memory. He set the mirror beside the lamp, its edge gleaming faintly. The two lights, one real, one reflected, seemed to bow toward each other in mutual reverence. The wind moved again, gentler now, carrying the sound of sand shifting over stone. It was not a song, not exactly, more the rhythm of a world forever writing and erasing its own story. Sarin listened to it in silence, his expression calm, almost radiant. Her time moved softly, unmeasured. The moon began its climb, pale and watchful, spreading light across the dunes until the entire world glowed faintly silver. The air cooled further, the kind of cool that carries peace rather than chill. Saran lifted his lamp slightly and let its light merge with moonlight. Two lights, he murmured, one made by hand, one made by sky, and yet both speak the same language. He closed his eyes and listened again to the quiet pulse of the desert, that deep, slow rhythm beneath all things. In that sound, he heard echoes of the oasis, the lapping of water, the whisper of palm leaves, the faint chime of wind through woven cloth. Though the place was far behind him now, its essence had followed. It lived not in distance, but in stillness. He exhaled softly, a sound halfway between breath and prayer. When he opened his eyes again, the flame of the lamp had steadied into a small, unwavering glow. He reached toward it, his hand hovering just above the warmth. Every traveler, he said quietly, must one day set down his flame. But its light never truly leaves the path. He placed the lamp upon the sand, its glow casting long, graceful shadows. For a moment, he simply watched it, that small, steady sun in the vastness of night. Then, with a gentle motion, he covered it with its brass lid. The light dimmed, then softened, then vanished completely. The moonlight remained. Sarin leaned back, his eyes tracing the slow drift of constellations across the sky. The silence deepened around him, perfect and whole. Somewhere in that silence, the faint chime returned, the sound he had heard before, far away, now close again, familiar and kind. It was not wind against metal this time, but something softer, perhaps imagination, perhaps memory. It shimmered briefly, then faded into stillness. Sarin smiled. "Ah," he whispered. So the merchant's secrets were never things to keep, only moments to remember. He drew his robe tighter, lay back upon the sand and closed his eyes. The desert, vast and gentle, embraced him like water. The warmth of the day had settled deep into the earth, and the cool breath of night moved across him in slow rhythm. Above the stars burned quietly their light, timeless and kind. And there, beneath that endless sky, the wandering merchant rested no longer a figure in motion, but a quiet part of the stillness he had followed all along. Far away, the oasis dreamed its waters, reflecting the same stars that shone above him. Palm leaves whispered softly over their own reflections, their sound mingling with the hush of the world. Everything, the dunes, the air, the faint shimmer of sand seemed to breathe together, one slow, eternal rhythm of peace. The merchant's journey, like all journeys, had folded back into rest. The night held him gently. The silence spoke kindly, and the desert, patient and infinite, listened.